We hear a lot about how divided and divisive American politics is these days, but it may be even worse than you think, according to a new article, Our Slow-Motion Civil War, in the weekly iPad magazine Huffington, reprinted in the Huffington Post. It's written by the editorial director of AOL Huffington Post Media Group, the second best-looking MSNBC contributor after Alicia Menendez. Howard Fineman is on the couch. Thanks for being here, Howard.
What an introduction.
Great to have you as always. Joining us to discuss the fractious state of the American body politic is financial analyst Karl Denninger, Associate Professor of History at Brown University, Robert Self, and President of IndependentVoting.org, Jackie Salit. Howard, you write, much of our politics is eerily reminiscent of Lincoln's time when the country split in two. Now as then, the party system is broken and achingly in need of upheaval.
Yes.
I mean, there's a bit of a difference, isn't there, between an obstructionist Congress and people fighting each other across South Carolina with muskets. Should I be stockpiling canned ham? Or where are we at?
Have you been to South Carolina lately?
Not lately.
Well, of course. I took a little literary and historical license there.
But where do you see it?
I do think that there's something deeper going on that we don't entirely understand. And I think Professor Self in his book got at part of it, which is that the sort of genetic destiny of mankind is now up for grabs. Is it controlled by government? Is it controlled by God? We've uncoupled the traditional family, so-called, from procreation, from the destiny of the human race. That sounds grandiose, but it's true.
Jerry Falwell would say the same thing.
Yeah, well,
he wouldn't now, but he would have when he wasn't 6 feet
I still
under.
talk to Jerry.
Good.
And yes, that was what he was talking about. And I've got to say, just looking at that one issue, I was on the floor of the convention halls at both conventions. The loudest single applause line of any at both conventions on a singular topic was on the issue of abortion.
I think there's always been a social Darwinist tendency in the right wing of the Republican Party, and for a while in the right wing of the Democratic Party, going back to the late 19th century. I think the genius of the Republican Party, the modern Republican Party under Reagan, was to make family values central to that somewhat social Darwinian vision. And what's interesting about what's happened recently with Mitt Romney is I think that's started to fray a little bit, right? That the actual raw nature of the social Darwinian view of the right wing is exposed a bit more. What I try to do in the book is talk about how family values politics was not a distraction from the core political fights. It was actually the ground on which the core political fights since the 1960s have unfolded.
Where does the independent voter lie? Is it just floating in some kind of purgatory in between these two extremes? How do we bring out the independent vote, and is there any possibility of getting a third party out of it?
40% of the country today are independents. And part of what I hear in listening to the discussion and reading Howard's column, which I thought was very provocative and interesting, but the problem with it, I think, is that it frames everything in terms of the political parties and the existing ideologies that they give expression to. But part of what's going on in America today is not just the polarization between the two parties and between the left and the right, if you will. Part of what's going on is that there is such disaffection with the parties, with traditional ideological framings, that many, many people, indeed 4 in 10, now identify themselves as something other than Democrats and Republicans.
How much of that 4 out of 10 do you think are actually sort of undecided swing independent voters? And what proportion are disaffected Republicans and Democrats who basically are still Republicans and Democrats, but just don't like to call themselves that because they have problems with the label?
You know, that, with all due respect, that kind of interpretation of people being political independents is something that really pisses independents off.
Let it out, Jackie. Let it out. Bring it on, baby.
The left and the right in this country, no matter what label you care to put on them, have gone through the last 40 years making promises that they cannot keep. We have, over the last 4 years, covered up an economic depression with deficit spending. That is a mathematical fact. Now, the problem with doing this, of course, is that the Republicans have had the House of Representatives for the last 2 years, and of course the Democrats had utter control of Congress and the executive for the first 2 of Barack Obama's term. So since all spending bills must originate in the House, neither one of the parties can turn around and say that they're innocent in this regard or that one is more at fault than the other. The problem is that neither one of the political parties are willing to stand up and say, whatever you want the government to provide in the form of services, you must pay for today in current taxes, because you cannot tax enough money out of the wealthy in order to close that budget gap. It physically cannot be done. This is arithmetic. This doesn't have anything to do with politics.